The Turning Point was nominated for 11, count 'em, 11 Academy Awards, including all the big ones, but it didn't win any of them. It didn't win a single one, and yes, that is a record. Today, nobody has really heard of this movie. I know you've heard of it, but you and I were the only ones, and last week, I didn't know what it was. The Turning Point has about 5,000 votes on IMDb, a little more than that, and it's rated 6.8. We have a lot of questions to answer. Was this movie any good in the first place? Why has it fallen out of favor? Why is it seemingly so forgotten? Is it really seemingly so forgotten? It stars Anne Bancroft and Shirley MacLaine. These seem like big stars to me, but maybe they aren't these days. Maybe they don't have generational staying power. What do you think? Could it be maybe just that the film bros or whoever is in charge of the canon these days can't wrap their heads around a movie mostly about women and mostly about dancing? Maybe the movie wasn't that great to begin with. I don't know. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but I do have a lot to say about this one. First of all, The Turning Point is a really uneven movie. Overall, I liked it a lot, and I think 6.8 is a crazy rating. If we were only looking at the IMDb rating, this would be one of the most underrated movies that I've ever featured. But it is not without its flaws. The Turning Point has electrifying acting and many truly great scenes, but it also has some terrible acting and some fairly long stretches that just might not interest you very much. The reason for both of those downsides is the same thing. It's because this is a movie about ballet that teeters between being a social drama and a ballet showcase. There's a lot of ballet in it, and it seems like they did this right, getting a bunch of the world's best ballet people in it, getting an orchestra, but there are some downsides. And, one of them is that some of these ballerinas are not the greatest actors. There are also a number of long segments of ballet that maybe disrupt the narrative flow a little bit, leave the movie feeling somewhat unbalanced. It seems like most people who like The Turning Point like it because of the ballet, but not me. I don't really care about ballet, and I felt like some of the numbers were a bit too long. They probably don't call them numbers. I felt like some of these sequences were a bit too long. I like the movie because it's a nice 1970s social drama with some interpersonal subtlety, balance, and a huge dose of uncertainty. I don't think this is just a movie for ballet lovers, but if you don't like ballet or the 1970s, you might be in trouble. This might be the wrong movie for you. Of course, just about every movie about performance faces a question of how to balance the story with the show. Musicals are kind of defined by this balance or the transition between these two things, the transcendental moments, right, where we go from story to somewhere else, moments of fusion. The director, Herbert Ross, made a bunch of musicals. This isn't really a musical, but it does have a couple of those moments. You might say that The Turning Point is like a cross between The Red Shoes and All That Jazz. Both of these movies maybe get the balance a little bit better than this one. Both of those movies might be a little bit better than this one, but not by a whole lot. We'll come back to some of these dynamics of how you film this like backstage thing. Yeah, balancing the performance, the behind the scenes, and then sort of the musicality of it or whatever. We'll come back to that. I like the way that the movie starts out. It's got a good expositional style where things aren't thrown in your face. Feels like a 1970s movie. We're introduced to this family. Shirley MacLaine is married to Thomas Skerritt. It's a small role for him, but he's really good. And they've got 3 kids. They're getting ready to go. You'll never guess. They're getting ready to go to the ballet. I think they're in Oklahoma City. Turns out the kids are obsessed with ballet. Dee Dee, which is Shirley MacLaine's character, she's kind of emotional about ballet. You don't know why at first, but it turns out, they know some of the people in the company. Oh, they used to be in the company. And she's got this long-standing friendship, or wait, is it a rivalry? With Emma, which is Anne Bancroft, who is still in the company, still performing, but possibly about to age out. And maybe they like each other. Maybe they hate each other. Dee Dee comes to the ballet with uncertainty, doubt, even mourning, a big sense of regret about maybe what could have been about her career, something like that. And on top of everything, her daughter, Amelia, hey, she might have the chance to join the company and to be mentored by Emma, possibly usurping Dee Dee's maternal role. A little later on, we'll get more of a romantic theme too, having to decide between marriage and the ballet. Story of my life. Actually, it's the story of the Red Shoes, but here we have a lot more subtlety. I went to college with a guy named Toby. We were often confused for one another. Toby apparently had almost committed to being a full-time ballet person, but had chosen to go to college instead. I really regret that I never asked him more about this interesting story in his life. Anyway, on paper, the story of The Turning Point is pretty simple. Keep in mind that when you take out all the dancing scenes, this movie isn't super long. Nonetheless, the scenario is a perfect stage for some really poignant stuff, for a lot of subtlety, a lot of back and forth. I've seen a couple of reviews that say that The Turning Point is a fluff piece, that it's the perfect soapy movie, or from a negative perspective, that it's hopelessly saccharine. I think I may have watched a different movie than these people. To me, large parts of this movie hit with the impact and the nuance of like a Cassavetes film or something, a real 1970s social drama. And I do wonder if maybe people are too quick to dismiss some of the film's big ideas and emotional currents. Do you see Dee Dee thinking back to her past with the company and just say, get over it, that was history? To be fair, she is kind of stuck on some of these memories. She is slightly annoying at times. But yeah, do people just not quite engage with some of the like real bread and butter of the story here? I don't know. There are parts of the movie, of course, that are not that great. Like I said, very uneven. Almost every secondary character, except for Tom Skerritt, is a bit suspect in terms of acting. Baryshnikov, I think, does a decent job at acting. He's probably the best ballet actor in the movie. Most of these characters, despite the acting being a little bit suspect, are actually fairly strong characters in some ways. They're multifaceted. For instance, we meet the owner of the ballet company a number of times, and she's mostly unpleasant. At first, she seems really unpleasant, but then you see, she really seems to care about this company. There's an interesting moment when we learn that her necklace is fake, that she sold her real one many years ago to pay for a musician's strike. So that's a little bit empathetic, but then she turns around and calls them pigs. Interesting characters. There's a lot of sort of subtlety like that in the movie. One thing that really makes this film work is that Dee Dee and Emma's characters are well balanced against each other. This movie is kind of a duel between the two of them. I mean, it's not really a duel, but as it goes on, you inevitably wonder who has the moral high ground, who made the right life choices, who should we be rooting for. But the movie does not tip the scale on these questions at all. Both characters are dignified and headstrong, admirable in some ways, but also pretty flawed. When they argue with each other, you struggle to take sides. They're both right, they're both wrong. This relationship is sort of the Gordian knot at the center of the film. It powers the movie, and it never unravels. I like this a lot. Motherhood is a big theme in the movie. Shirley MacLaine really knows how to play your mom. Some of her moments with her daughter are a little on the nose, and sometimes she's a little annoying, but hey, maybe that's accurate. She gets something about the act of mothering in this movie that's really apt, though. There's just a certain type of labor, emotional labor, that she's always kind of busy with, engaged in. That's really interesting. Most of this movie takes place in New York City, so now the truth about why I reviewed it comes out. Dee Dee is going to end up taking two of her kids there, and there's a great moment when she's dropping her son off at his dance lesson. Okay, the son does kind of disappear from the movie. That's maybe a bit of a flaw. He goes to this dance class and is never seen again. Maybe he danced into the danger zone. Anyway, Dee Dee wants to come in with him to see some of this class, and obviously the kid doesn't want that, and he says, "Don't you have anything better to do?" And she says, "No, not really." And I can't quite put this into words, but I think this is pointing right at this act of mothering, which is interesting. Let's talk about ballet a little bit. It's sort of inevitable that we do that. I had a funny moment of conflicting intuitions the other day. Normally, when I think of ballet, I'm a little bit suspicious. One thing that's cool about movies, of course, is that it's a popular art form. Movies are for everybody. Do normal people watch the movies that I like? Of course not. But still, movies are for everybody. Once upon a time, they did watch the movies I like, I guess. I don't know. Even today, it's not that hard to get into it. There aren't that many barriers. I'm suspicious of art forms that are mainly patronized by the wealthy, and ballet surely is in that category. And it seems a bit stuffy culturally and in terms of like the formal like technique of it too, although I'm clearly not the expert on that front. The movie pushes back on these class ideas a little bit, by the way. It has a funny moment where one of the older people surrounding the company hears that someone has left ballet to work on Broadway, and she says, "Oh, well, he's got no soul." I mentioned already this character who is leading the ballet company, who in some ways is very attached to sort of an upper class image, but she's also a bit of a grifter who's just constantly looking for donations and is constantly just trying to keep the ballet afloat. So it's interesting. Of course, neither one of these things is really directly pushing back on what I've said, but the fact that these facets are in the movie shows some sense of perspective on behalf of the film itself. Dee Dee's kids are on scholarships. They're not rich. Mikhail Baryshnikov, who is in the movie, he's famous enough that you probably would have heard of him, even if you know nothing about ballet. Well, he had just defected from the Soviet Union, and, I doubt his life was defined by opulence. So anyway, the class story isn't clear-cut, but still, I think of ballet as being stuffy, and I'm probably not the only one. The other day, this is supposed to be a funny story, the other day I saw an article about how ballet has a declining patronage. Maybe it's starting to die out. The kids aren't as interested in ballet. It's harder to make money, all this stuff. I have no idea if this is really true, but I felt a surprising sense of loss while reading the article. Not, oh good, this elitist trend is dying out, but oh no, TikTok is killing ballet. And I don't know, I thought this was sort of a funny way for a postmodern current to sort of come to the surface. That's my possibly flawed thinking that these things are elitist until they're going out of style, in which case they're cool. Well, anyway, let's get back to the movie. The turning point did not make me fall in love with ballet, but it does capture something. First of all, I strongly suspect that watching ballet is a bit like watching a Tarkovsky movie where you will not be immediately enraptured, probably not. But if you sit with it and you focus on it and you kind of learn what to look for and what to watch, you pick up on the smaller movements and the currents, then you can find your way into something powerful and moving. And if we want to capture this thing, we can't just show a bunch of short snippets. It has to be durational, right? You have to get the audience to really sit and watch. And I respect that this movie has some longer segments in it because it gives us a sense of that duration. And I think that's probably important. Still, didn't really work for me, but I respect it. And one thing that I think did work for me is how the movie shows the emotion that people are bringing to the shows. There's a line from Emma. She says that, is my career great? Well, I don't know. It has a lot of ups and downs, but sometimes life and music and dance all align, and it's powerful or magical or something like that. In The Turning Point, we see this alignment sometimes. We see people going to the ballet with a lot on their minds, going to watch it and going to perform in it when they're immersed in a huge emotional storyline of their own life. And we see how, this show becomes part of their life. I think that's pretty interesting. Now, I think there's a lot more to ballet than this, and most art forms you could describe in a similar way. I mean, that's definitely true of me watching movies at times. Still, it's a nice facet. I think the movie does a good job capturing this. There's a lot of looking in this movie, a lot of people looking at things, lots of people watching a performance, perhaps not surprising. Lots of shots of performers looking at each other. Ballet, ultimately, you look at it, so it's not too surprising. But the onstage dynamic is interesting. Seeing people in the performance sort of look at one another, almost stepping away from the choreographed nature of it, is interesting. There's a fine line between a performance and a person, especially in something like ballet, which is choreographed. There are a couple of scenes that play on this where they tease out an individual from a performance and are maybe showing it could be something as simple as wow, she's finally performing in the ballet and she's standing, she's watching, she's next to her idol and she's going to go look over at her idol a little bit as she performs, again, playing with sort of the emotional or the individual thing versus the group thing. There's also an incredibly hard to watch scene where this kind of dynamic, the group versus the individual, is the dramatic linchpin of things. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but that scene has a lot of juice. Anyway, we could talk about how you film musicals and dance for hours. There's a lot of different schools of thought on this. There were periods where people liked to do a bunch of editing to accentuate the movement. There were periods where people did the opposite, and they had long takes that would showcase the performance, not interrupt it, not get in the way of it. This movie does a good job of balancing things. There are some interesting techniques in there, but it doesn't feel gimmicky the way that it's shot. There's a couple pieces that surprised me a little bit, like in the gala section towards the end of the movie. One thing they do there is they have on-screen credits for the dancers and the music. They introduce this by showing us a page from a program which has some of the credits in it. But then when we get to the next sort of snippet of dance in the gala, they just show us text on the screen. I don't know what to make of this exactly. It was kind of jarring. Overall, this movie has good style. It's not too far afield of the way that most musicals are functioning, where they're kind of switching from reality to something else. But it has a few things that feel a little different there. Overall, like I said, good style. Getting back to the narrative stuff, I mentioned already that it's got this nice expositional feel, very 1970s, very aloof, sort of a documentary style. There's also some nice dramatic moments. There's a bit where we have the Lubitsch touch here and there even. For instance, there's a scene where someone is drinking a beverage with a cherry in it, I think. And each time she drinks one, she takes the cherry out and puts it on the table. Well, cut to a pile of cherries on the table. Guess she's been drinking quite a bit. Nice mechanic, reminds me of the pills in Witness for the prosecution. So we have a good balance of naturalistic stuff and some more classic structures. There are also a few stylistic whiffs. For instance, towards the end of the film, we get the honor of hearing some snippets of audio that we already heard earlier in the movie. We hear them played back. I've never seen this technique work in any movie. Usually it's a sign that the film wasn't written well enough to foreground some information that was given earlier on, and they need to remind the audience or something like that. Usually it's a sign of other problems. I don't really even know why they did it in this movie. They just felt like one of the dances was a bit barren, and they needed to have some callbacks to earlier in the film. Anyway, it's terrible. There are flaws throughout the movie, but to me, I think the good way outweighs the bad pretty significantly. I still have doubts about this movie, honestly. Maybe it's not that great, but I'm pretty sure that I really liked it. If you've seen it, I am legitimately curious what you think about this movie. Last question, why did it fall off the face of the earth? Well, first of all, it might just be thought of as a dance movie, and people might skip over it because of that. Oh, that movie's about ballet, don't want to watch it. Like I said, I think that's kind of a mistake. You don't need to like ballet to like this movie, but wouldn't surprise me if it sort of falls in that category a little bit. It's possible that it was a bit overhyped when it came out, that it was a bit of a gimmick. The big ballet stars were nominated for Academy Awards out of awe. It's like amazing seeing ballet people in a movie. So maybe that, maybe there was a little bit more hype than expected. Did it deserve all 11 Academy Awards? I don't know. It's if I had to guess how many nominations it had gotten from seeing the movie, I wouldn't guess quite that many. But I wouldn't say it's like inconceivable. Like I said, most of the ballet people don't act that well. Baryshnikov is okay. It could be that the movie is just buried in the 1970s. This was kind of my favorite part about it, but it might not resonate with modern audiences. It might not be as legible for people who don't watch a ton of 1970s movies. This aloofness and sort of documentary feel might not seem like a virtue the way that I think it does to me. It could be, like I said, because the movie is mostly about women, and if you're not invested in their feelings, I guess, there isn't much else happening in the movie. I think that'd be an unfortunate way to miss on this one, and I don't know if that's really plausible, but it's possible. Shirley MacLaine and Anne Bancroft are pretty famous, but like I said, maybe they don't have the same draw today. If Clint Eastwood were in the movie, would more people know about it? Herbert Ross isn't a particularly famous director, so maybe it just doesn't have enough sort of things pointing to it or whatever. The SEO for this film is not good enough. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just not that good. I think those are most of the reasons I can think of. They're all plausible, I guess. Maybe there was something out of left field, like some licensing snafu, and it just hasn't been shown as much. I don't know. Either way, I hope that more people get to see The Turning Point, because it is an interesting film and a moving one, even if you don't care at all about ballet.